Welcome everyone back to the session 1, Digitalization and Technology, Determinism in the Age of Dematerialization and Demonetization of International Trade. Now on this fruitful session, we will have more clarified perception of the risk factor and the success key trend of applying the model of governmental administration in the very near future. We are very honored from 3 remarkable speakers and 1 distinguished moderator. So please welcome Dr. Surajit Mazumdar, Jawaharlal Nehru University, India, our first speaker. Please give an applause to welcome Dr. Surajit. Next, we are honored by Dr. Zaid Sultan Qazi, Deputy Director, Digital Empowerment Foundation. And comes our third speaker, Dr. Silapon Buasai, Deputy Director on Social Innovation at Thailand Research Fund, Member Board of Director. And our moderator, please welcome Dr. Dam Sukhonasap, Board of Directors, Institute for Trade and Development. And the stage is yours.
Good morning, distinguished participants. Welcome to our conference. This is our annual conference. So thank you very much for being here this morning. To start off our first session for today, we have a distinguished panel. On my immediate right, Dr. Surajit Mazumdar. He is a renowned economist and now a professor at the Center of Economic Studies and Planning at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. He specialized in political economy, Indian industrialization, Indian corporate sector, and globalization. His recent researches focus on the study of the Indian corporate sector, Indian industrialization, and the impact of globalization on the Indian economy. Dr. Mazumdar is an active academic, and he participates in the public debate and discussions against the background of the government of India's dramatic demonetization decision in November of 2016. And I'm sure all of you would be interested to hear what Dr. Mazumdar has to say as a forensic analysis of what happened in 2016. Next is Dr. Zaid Sultan Qazi. He is the Deputy Director at the Digital Empowerment Foundation, which is a pan-Indian and South Asia organization with headquarters in New Delhi. Dr. Qazi is an ICT expert on development. He works on key programs on partnership and collaboration with national and international agencies, which include the Bill Melinda Gates Foundation, the European Union, the British Council, the ITU, the UNDP, and Frederick Newman Foundation. He also works with the Government of India on ICT initiatives. Dr. Qazi also publishes extensively on various journals, magazines, and newspapers. And last but not least is Dr. Silapon Buasai. I'm sure many of you here knows her. Dr. Silapon is currently the Commissioner and Secretary to the National Commission on Social Equality Strategy. She, before coming to her current position, Dr. Silapon was the Deputy Director on Social Innovation at the Thailand Research Fund. She was also the member of the National Reform Council between 2014 and 2015. and the chair of the Commission on Overall Synthesis of the National Reform Proposal, and chair of the Subcommission on Budgetary and Fiscal Reform on the Commission of Bureaucracy Reform. Dr. Silapon received her doctorate from Florida State University in the US. So with that brief introduction, what I plan to do is I will give each of our panelists about 8 to 10 minutes to speak. Some of them have their prepared slides, but I have brutally asked them to move on quickly with their PowerPoint presentations. And then that will be the first round of the discussion. So I will ask each of them to spend about 8 to 10 minutes. And then after that, I'll try to make it a conversation, a discussion. So I'll try to throw questions at them. We have about 2 hours altogether. It can be a long time, it can be a short time. But what we'll do is I will open up the floor after the first hour. So in that way, we will have some interaction from the audience, and I'm sure some of you would have good questions and comments to share with our panelists. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Dr. Masumda so he can begin.
Distinguished Chairperson, my distinguished co-panelists, and all distinguished participants at this forum. The subject matter that has been given to me to discuss India's demonetization experiment is, of course, relates to a measure of the Government of India announced in November 2016, quite dramatically late in the day by the Prime Minister of the country on national television. Relates to a national currency which has very limited use in the settlement of any cross-border transactions. It also relates to an economy whose case the scale of international transactions relative to the domestic economy is less than in most other parts of the world. Nevertheless, given that India is a very large economy and its interlinkages with the rest of the world economy are important to an extent in determining what happens in the world economy, the consequences of that demonetization experiment is something which has perhaps a larger significance, which goes beyond what actually happens to the economy within India. Now, the issue that is there is that what was announced in November 2016 was the currency that was used in India in the legal tender status of 86% of the currency in use in India was overnight withdrawn. And for the first time, India's central bank, the Reserve Bank of India, was actually obliged to meet the notional promise that is there on every currency note signed by the governor. I promise to pay the bearer the sum of so many rupees. Was actually obliged to meet that obligation because the papers on which it was signed had been declared illegal. So if you see on this graph, you will see that the proportion of the currency which was constituted by rupees 500 and 1000, the two highest denomination currencies in India, had been increasing over time, and roughly about a little over 10% of India's GDP was the magnitude of this currency, and it was 86% of the total currency in circulation. This was withdrawn, and it took a few months before that currency could be actually replaced. What people were asked to do was to deposit the currency in banks, and there was a staggered process of replacement of this currency with new currency, one of which was, and most of which originally was of a higher denomination, which was 2,000 rupees. So it was a pretty large magnitude measure, if you look at it in terms of the scale of the currency, which was, whose legal tender status was withdrawn. And I'm not aware of any other case in history where something of this scale has been attempted. Now the immediate impact was of course in the nature of a big macroeconomic shock to the economy, not because currency was used everywhere, but there were significant parts of the economy which were heavily dependent on the use of currency. And the withdrawal of the legal tender status was a big shock to that segment of the economy, and through interlinkages, it affected the entire economy. Now, you can see in this particular graph that the short-term impact was undoubtedly that several transactions that would normally have happened were not allowed because of the fact that you couldn't use this currency as a means of settlement of payments. So this data relates to withdrawal of currency from ATMs and the possible alternatives people had to the use of currency, which was the most common uses in India would be, because the most common thing is people have phones, mobile phones, or people have, there are a very large number of debit cards which are issued against bank deposits, even if the value of the deposits is very small. The proportion of the population which in principle holds debit cards is very large. But if you see from this particular figure, which compares 2015 and 2016, the same periods in the year before demonetization and the year of demonetization, you can see that when the demonetization announcement was made, the cash withdrawals from ATMs dropped drastically. And of course, cash is used several times before it enters back into the system and banks. The cash withdrawals dropped drastically, but the usage of prepaid instruments involving the use of phones or debit cards for payments at points of sale didn't really compensate for the extent of decline in cash withdrawals. Now, this was a natural outcome, I think, in an economy where large part of the economy is, or country is rural. India is still about 2/3 rural. 2/3 of the Indian population lives in the countryside. So the density of availability of infrastructure is very low in rural areas, which you can use for other kinds of transactions. Secondly, it has a very large informal, unorganized or unregistered segment in the economy. More than 50% of India's GDP is produced in what is called the unorganized sector, and 90% of Indian employment is in that particular sector, is informal or unorganized in nature. So it has a very large unorganized sector where the use of cash or currency was pretty common, was the most common mode of use. So in this, so naturally the withdrawal of the currency had a pretty dramatic kind of effect in terms of the immediate shock that it gave to the economy. The question is, what were the long-term impacts of this particular shock and in relation to the potential gains or benefits that a particular measure might have brought. We know that today, for the last 6 quarters, the Indian economy has been slowing down. And a lot of people have argued, and I would also argue the same, that this is in some senses the lagged effect of the demonetization measures, because it had permanent damaging effects on certain parts of the Indian economy which were extensively dependent on the use of cash. Now, the significance of this particular measure, okay, what I wish to highlight is that one of the arguments was that we were trying to supposedly move away from the use of currency and to bring more of the transactions in India within kind of recorded accounting framework, so that unaccounted incomes would be reduced, the evasion of taxes would be reduced. But if you look at the importance of currency in the Indian economy, it was very clear, even before the measure was announced, that relative to what was said to be the size of India's black economy, the unaccounted part of the economy, with estimates where tax evasion takes place, estimates range from 20% to 50%. In relation to 20 to 50% of GDP, in relation to that, the quantum of currency that was actually in use was simply not that large. So it wasn't possible for bulk of the evaded or unaccounted income to be actually, or unaccounted wealth, to be actually held in the form of currency. As you can see from this particular graph, that the currency with the public as a percentage of broad money, which is currency plus deposits with banks, had been consistently declining. And if you just compare deposits and currency, you find that within that broad money, only about 10% of the total holding was in the form of currency. So this, we knew that therefore the quantum of wealth held in the form of currency was already very small. The other indicator of this was that if you look at the transactions in the Indian economy, you find that there was a clear pattern that large value transactions were not in currency. So RTGS, which is real-time gross settlement, look at the scale of the transactions relative to India's GDP, and look at the quantum of withdrawals from ATMs. And I would draw your attention to the third blue column, which is the average transaction value. So the average withdrawal from an ATM in India was just over 3,000 rupees, okay, which is a fraction of the national income, very, very small fraction. So it was in smaller value transactions that largely currency was used. And because of India being a country with where large portions of the population have extremely low incomes, a very large number of transactions are extremely low value transactions. So in India, marketers say the big challenge is breaking down bulk. Shampoo in India has to be sold in small sachets because no one can buy in bulk. They don't have the incomes to buy in bulk, they buy in very small quantities. So it is in small value transactions that currency was largely used, whereas large value transactions were in other forms and in electronic, using digital technologies, but already the fairly large number of transactions were in other forms. So if it was the case that a large part of India's GDP was not being accounted for and there was a large-scale evasion of taxes, it couldn't have been possibly through the transactions which were in the form of currency. Yes, of course, the currency was also used to conceal. Currency-based transactions were certainly used to conceal the fact that there was that you had a transaction or you had an earning or an income. But the scale of it relative to the total scale of evasion couldn't have been possibly extremely large. So these were things that were known before the measure was announced, that an attack on the use of currency was not necessarily going to, therefore, produce the result of unearthing a large degree of unaccounted income. Now, as it so happened, if one looks at the implications or consequences of that particular measure, so this table is roughly the same indicators as in the previous graph, but it shows you that there has been over a period of time, as technology has developed, access to some kind of infrastructure has developed, use of phones, access to internet has developed, there has been already a trend of the decline in the relative importance of currency in the use of transactions. In fact, even the mode in which currency is withdrawn has been changed by technology. So part of the reason why the large denomination currencies increased in importance in India was that withdrawals increasingly now were from ATMs rather than from bank branches. So when you withdraw from ATMs, it's usually you tend to withdraw in, you get high denomination currencies. So that was part of the reason why high denomination currencies actually increased in importance in Indian currency. But there was already a steady trend of increase in the relative use of other modes of settlement of payments, and it is doubtful in the long run that the demonetization decision made a significant difference to the degree to which this was. It's basically been a function more of how easy or accessible it is for people to use other modes of transactions. And in some cases, currency remains the most viable methods of settlement of payments given the Indian economic context. The other aspect of the thing was the implications it would have for the tax discipline in India. Okay, that there was supposedly large degree of tax evasion. So what implications it would have for tax evasion? Now, as it happened, one of the expectations was that people would not be willing to declare that they held such large amounts of currency, and when they deposited it, they would reveal that they have that particular income. So expectation was that a significant amount of black wealth or unaccounted wealth would be extinguished by that particular measure because people would not be willing to show by depositing it in the banks. But 99% of the currency was actually returned to the banks, and even after 99% of the currency was returned to the banks, if you see the impact on the tax revenues of the government, you find that there is actually no impact that you see of that particular, this process of the generation of tax revenue. So tax revenue generation has been poor in India, and it continues to be poor, and you see no marked change in the trend of tax revenue mobilization, and particularly I draw attention to the bottom two lines, which are indicating the figures as far as the taxes which were expected to be affected by the demonetization measure. So in conclusion, what I would say is that the impact of technology, okay, it's the availability of technology and the costs that use of the technology involves. The use of money is about economizing costs of transactions. So the degree to which technology enables the reduction in that cost, people will opt for that use of technology. It's not necessarily something that can be forced, and to force it in the context of an economy like India, where such a large unorganized sector exists, is something that can have extremely damaging consequences, not only in the short run, but also in the long run. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Mazumdar. And this is just the first speaker, and he has already raised a lot of questions, I'm sure, because he was already making arguments that the initiative that took place in India did not really have the impact that was intended. So the original intention was, as Professor Mazumdar has said, to bring all the informal businesses into the formal structure of the economy, and also to get rid of the so-called the black economy, the black businesses in the economy, so that all of them would be transparent. And it seems that after the fact, it did not give the intended impact. So let's hear from Dr. Kasi on how, from your experience, Dr. Kasi, how has all this impact the people on the street in India? What effect it has on the overall economy, the labor people who the lower income people, and as Dr. Mazumdar has said, a lot of people live in the rural area where they don't have really good access to banking and technology.
So still morning, good morning, because I was adjusting my watch after landing in Bangkok since yesterday, because 1.5 hours I have to adjust my mind. I'm adjusting my mind all the time. So good morning to all of you, and so honorable chair, moderator, co-panelist, and of course a few formalities I have to do because I'm a guest in Bangkok. So thank you ITD and for this event and calling us and inviting India. We are Indians, so we met here only, not in Delhi. And so we stay in the same city in Delhi. And of course, he is in academician of excellence and being in economics and a very particular about facts, figures, statistics and all, but I'm not so much. So I work with an organization in India and of course few countries in South Asia where it's called Digital Empowerment Foundation. So largely it's an implementing agency. We implement programs on the ground. And India is a country of countries. So, it's so many countries. If India would have been in different, part by part, you would have 30, 40 countries within India only. Because of the culture, diversity, language, and so many things, So diversity is everywhere. So we implement programs, we have certain experiences, and probably I am here today not as a speaker, but probably just to share a few thoughts and experiences, what we have felt, or what a country like Thailand could feel or experience when such kind of digitization, demonetization, or technology determinism, or dematerialization, all those kind of experiments are happening or going to happen if the government decides sooner or later. Already, I'm sure already certain measures have taken up in Thailand. And also in a country like Thailand and India, where the vast majority still lives in rural belt. And it's not like you and me, we are English educated, we are technology literate, cities stay in urban areas, urbanization, we understand urbanization, modernization, everything. But I think we are here together to understand the issues, the subjects, and which will impact everyone. Every Thai citizen, every Indian citizen. It's not just only 20% or 30% of the population, but will impact every part of the society and the country. So coming back to the topic, I was told that, probably how these things called digitization or demonetization and all those technology interventions also have impact on the psychology of inequality. And when this topic was shared, I was just totally started thinking, what is exactly? Because everything starts with the mind only. Mind is everything. We are all driven by our minds and thought processes, and what we are is what our mind says. What we talk, what our mind says. What we feel is what our mind perceives and everything. And probably what the government does is also about some people in the decision making. People means what their mind talks about, what they feel, perceive, and think. What is good, what is bad for the country or society, and then the decisions are being made. But of course, the questions can be asked why those thinkings of few people reflects the thinking of the majority, the situations of the majority people, and the conditions of the majority people. That are the bigger questions probably we need to think about when we take any strong decisions where impacts millions of people. So this topic, then I did some readings and all probably, and then I prepared few slides, but again I had to change the slides. But coming back to the this whole thing about which I'm trying to relate with the what Professor Majumdar has said, the demonetization in India, and also the technology push that the government of India is making in the last many years, is that. So I'll share on those part where demonetization is of course one part, where one justification has been given that cashless society, then also about how technology can improve citizen services at the last mile, and also where technology infrastructure can facilitate and strengthen, many things in our day-to-day lives. That is what the government decides and, talks about all those things. And tries to enforce, implement from the top. This has to be done, this has to be done, this is good for you, this is to be done, this is to be done, all those things are fine. So all these decisions and probably actions are good. in one way. But on the other side is that whether the majority side, where you the majority, we the majority side, are we ready? What is the e-readiness? What is the society ready to accept those? How ready they are? What is the level and layers of society where there needs to be built capacities to understand the technology, to take those technology and apply those technology? Because we are also struggling with the question of digital divide. Digital divide, of course we know what is digital divide, some understanding we do have, you have, I have and all. So we are struggling with one aspect of that. Despite technology has come in, but the digital divide is still there. Again with the divide, there's another thing is digital inequality. Digital inequality in the sense that you may have some basic device access, but you don't know the wherewithal to, you don't know the processes. You don't know how to utilize it, to navigate it, to use it. So those are the bigger questions. So when the demonetization happens by, say, one justification is that digital cashless society, digital payments, online transactions. But what about the questions of connectivity in the rural belt, in the majority places for this, as Professor Majumdar has said, the informal economic side, where they are not part of the formal economies. They are still in cash-based transactions are still happening, till late is happening, so how you address those questions. I'm throwing these thoughts to all of us. So that is one part. The second part is about as I say, one is connectivity part, till the last mile, to the village or the area where every last citizen of the country resides. If you want to really have an inclusive society, that is one thing. Second is about the capacity of the people, as I mentioned earlier, whether they are ready to accept it, whether they understand it, technology for me, whether I'm not whether I'm fearful. Because fear is another thing, insecurity is another thing, because common man is more, even we have insecurity of digital frauds, online transactions, because human beings are like this. When something comes, we have to react. Our psychology works that way, we feel, because it takes time to understand and feel friendly and then adapt and take it and make it more useful for you and myself. The third is about the insecurity part, as I said, digital frauds, because there are good elements, bad elements in every society. So of course they are parallelly playing their own part. So the fraud system happens, and then one fraud happens, and the rumors spread, the rumor mongering happens, the fear things. How we are addressing those issues about technology push of cashless society and all, and also. Probably the last point probably you're giving, because I need not to talk about. The last point that I wanted to share is here as of now is what happens to the mind, and what is that feeling of inequality is that if technology comes to us and government says we need to use it, and you need to use it, and this is how your services will be delivered and all. But again, whether all those previous factors that I mentioned, how the mind will react to those conditions, the challenges in terms of not being able to use, the insecurity factor, the fraud things happening, I don't have the capacity to use, how the mind also works. Probably that will also increase the inequality divide, probably. The psychology of inequality is in the mind. So it will also could widen up. Already there is a digital divide. There's an economic divide, there's a social divide in the society. But if technology puts certain these limitations, the question is whether this kind of limitations in technology push could also impact our psychological thought processes, and how it could really make us an inclusive society where every one of you probably sitting in this room, in every Thai people has to be inclusive. So those challenges, how the government or the country as a society are prepared, I think that is a bigger question. I had few slides, I'll just run through, and I very intelligently put it, said nobody understands the slides. So the colors are there, I'll just put it through. But we can still in a discussion mode, I think we can talk and discuss. So these are a few thoughts and things. So this is just an inequality thing, inequality exists in many ways, means and colors and everything, so how a society is adjusting in every context. And last one is the inequality of mind. So this is one thing I wanted to share, because where we talk about digitization, demonetization, I think this pictures how it impacts the mind. You know, we need to do a lot of research and understanding on this aspect. So these are all some few statistics, and few statistics inclusive. We talk about nowadays, we talk about sustainable development goal, inclusive goals, and so many things have come up. So probably when we try to go deeper and deeper, there are more challenges comes in. It's easier to talk in conferences and read and all, but when you apply those things on the ground, a lot of things are to be taken into consideration. This is one slide I have prepared. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all are connected. Poverty, inequality, digital divide, digital. That the tree you can see is all those urban sections and people around. At the bottom side, you know, the bigger challenge is on the bottom of the tree. But divide is moves into the third thing, the divide thing, the digital divide and inequality. Fifth is again it aggravates. Digital divide and inequality can again push back the divide, and economic divide and social divide, if you are not, if you don't take into certain key considerations. Next is on the left-hand side, of course, the society is trying to move up the bottom of the pyramid. People are trying to move and catch to the bandwagon of development, empowerment and all. On the right-hand side is again the mind effect, psychology effect, how it affects us, and how it again aggravates. And then number 3 is about how it can affect the society in various ways. And I request all of you to read one author, Keith Payne. She's a psychologist. He's a psychologist book called The Broken Ladder, How Inequality Affects the Way We Think, Live and Die. It's all about, you need to read that book. It has come out recently. And she talks about this whole thing of psychology of inequality in our society. So, this inequality is something which we never can be equal, and so these are the problems on the bottom we can have constantly. We keep on fighting in the society, and the whole world we keep on fighting the inequality and all. So inequality again everywhere. Competition is being taken advantage. Cooperation is gone somewhere. Success, failure, all these struggles going on, and it affects the mind somewhere down the line. Our mind is being affected. Each one of us is being affected. So these are some few thoughts. These are my thoughts. Of course, not my mind, but some of the thoughts that can affect us. I'm just finishing. This is one picture. Picture here, but the picture says a lot of things probably. So probably. The last thing I want to share is, this is another thing, how poverty is connected to digital inequality and interconnectedness. So we can come back to all these issues. These are the few questions I just wanted to leave to all of you. Probably in the next round we can come back. And there's another new concept being talking about gross national happiness. If you all know, I think we all know, that Bhutan started this thing. Probably we should talk more about that. Thailand should talk more about that gross happiness and what it means, gross happiness, and to feel equality. Feeling equality is more important than having more wealth. Thank you so much, Chair, for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kazi. Again, more interesting thoughts. I'm particularly interested in his thinking about the psychological impact, the feeling of being left behind because of the lack of access to technology or not knowing how to use it. So I'm sure the audience would have quite a few questions for you as well. But before that, let's go to our third panelist, Dr. Silapon. She is still taking notes, but I'm sure she is ready to share her thinking. Because, as I've mentioned, Dr. Silapon works quite a bit with people in the provinces, in the less developed areas of Thailand. So she'll be able to give some thoughts about how all of this would impact the people in the rural area. Before that, may I say something that, again, for the panelists to to share with us their thoughts. There are countries like Sweden. Unfortunately, we could not have a speaker from Sweden with us today, but there are countries like Sweden, which now almost 100% of the transactions are being done digitally, as opposed to the use of banknotes. And this is not something that the government is forcing on the people. It is the evolution of technology in countries like Sweden and many other countries in Scandinavia, the UK also. So it is a growing trend. Will something like this be applicable to countries in Asia? And if you argue that the people are not yet ready, when will they be ready? Okay, so before we go into the answers for that, let's go to Dr. Silapon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to be here today. In fact, I listened to Dr. Surajit's presentation with very keen interest. The case of India that he presented has marked a point that we should consider. Everything should start with a purpose. And we should think really hard about the purpose of using digital technology in trade and development. What is the real purpose? In India, in the case of India, the purpose seems to be to wipe out or try to curb or eliminate the informal sector, the black economy. But it turned out to be that it had damaged the rural economy in India because there's, you don't have other things to replace the banknotes. And therefore it affects the rural people a lot. I think rural economy should be, that's my field. In fact, I'm not in the field of digitization or technology or these things. My field is in rural economy. I think if you aim at promoting rural economy through the use of digital technology, that's the real question. Otherwise, if you were thinking about, for example, raising or generating tax revenue through using digital technology, that's one thing. But you might end up have repercussion on other things that you have not intended in the first place. When Jack Ma began his Alibaba in 1999, that's 20 years ago, his intention was on promoting small business as the driving force of the economy. He mentioned several times in his speech, and you could read it elsewhere, that his invention of the Alibaba was not for the large company. In fact, it's for the small businesses that could have a marketplace, a digital platform for small business to do business, B2B, business to business, C2C, customer to B2C, and all these things, and it has grown to be the top of the world right now. Last year, I went to China, and on a trip, on a tour, and I asked the guide, and he actually mentioned that, in fact, if he was not on his job as a tour guide, when he go out in the morning, get up and go out in the morning, all he needs was only a mobile phone. He doesn't have to carry cash anymore. I asked him about tax, about the e-commerce and people using this digital platform. in normal life, and how the government think about taxing people who buy and sell things on this digital platform. His answer surprised me. He said that actually the Chinese government didn't try to do anything about taxing people on the digital platform. That was surprising. Because in Thailand, the first thing that you think about the e-commerce is about taxing. How could we tax people on the digital platform, right? But in fact, he said something that I think worth thinking. He said that it's an incentive. The government try to promote people to put themselves on this platform, to join this platform. So it's a strategy to move people towards internet using and become internet users and use the digital platform as, in a day-to-day living, more and more. And to me, I came back, this is only information from a tourist guide, and it sparked an idea that, in fact, what the government has returned is far more huge than the tax that they could get from taxing local businesses. Because local economy could boom, because of the transaction that emerged so big. The figure in Thailand from EDDA, the Electronic Transaction Development Authority, figured that the e-commerce in Thailand grew 14% this year. And the figure is about $100 billion, the value of it. If you think about promoting rural economy as the first priority, tax revenue generation, or how could we handle the informal sector might become a different, thing to think about. Or maybe in this new era of digital transformation, those terminology about informal economy or trying to tax local business on those digital platforms are becoming outdated. It doesn't fit in. Those terminology don't fit in the new economy led by digital technology anymore, because the growth and the economic growth, the wealth generated could be vastly distributed to local businesses, to small business, rather than big business, and that serves the purpose of income generating, serves the purpose of lessening the inequality in the society, rather than the government would try to tax and get the money and do the lessening of equality by the government deed, by the government action. But this is the new action that could be promoted through the digital platform via e-commerce that could have strong, very high impact on lessening the poverty and inequality in the society, because you give more opportunity to small business, much like what Jack Ma did 20 years ago. And we have seen during the past 20 years how China have grown. And small business were the major engine of growth in China. That's I think is the real point that we should address when we talk about the role of digital technology in this new era of trade. The digital platform, how many of you have never ordered or buy things from Lazada or eBay or Alibaba? How many of you have never, ever bought anything? Please raise your hand. None. Maybe one or two. And you know that the commodities or the things that you purchase from those platforms, some of them came from outside the country, right? Last year I just ordered something from China. I don't know how it could go through custom or whatever, but I only have just use the mobile banking and this application, all these things, and it's so, so digital platform has come in to replace it's a new trade platform. Even the term import-export might have to be changed when you're talking about e-commerce, and it's growing very fast and becoming very big. I'm not sure what the Exim Bank would do next. I mean, the whole thing has changed. Not only that we use digital technology to help fasten the processes of bringing goods in and out of the country, but today it has surpassed everything already. So I think digital technology has already turned the trade platform, although we might not notice it. But how to make it impact rural people, how to make it impact the rural and local economy depends on how you see it, how you think about it. If you think about it as a market space of informal sector that the government has to go in and try to reap the most out of it through taxation, that's one way of thinking. But I think the Chinese government and Chinese businessmen like Jack Ma has think otherwise. And they have used digital platform as a way to, it has become a new state where the population, for example, Facebook has a population of 5,000 million people, much more than any state in the world, any nation state in the world. And the cost of maintaining, that is the government of Facebook, needs only minimal and doesn't cost as much as any government in any national government costs the countries. There are all kinds of transactions, social, economic, cultural transaction on those states, that virtual state. Like Facebook, you have cultural activities on that. You have economic activities. You have transactions. You have lots of things, and you have rules and regulations of how to use it. That's a new form of state that we are encountering right now. And the nation state is kind of at a loss of how to deal with those virtual states. And what they try to do is using the old tools or measures like taxing, issuing laws, those type of things to control those states. Whereas the development of the digital state, the virtual state, has, I don't think anybody can stop it right now. But you might start manipulating or make the most out of it by starting with asking the right question. How could we use those platforms, those technologies to benefit local people, to lessen the equality, to bring up a new balance in the economy. I think that's the point I'd like to make. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Siraporn. More food for thought. Very interesting. She said that everything should start with the purpose, the objectives. And obviously, the objectives in India is quite different from the objectives in Scandinavia. But since we are a development and trade organization, let's have a question on development and trade. Dr. Masumda, so what do you think was the impact of the demonetization policy in India on development and trade in India, especially on exports? Because as you know, during that period, 2016 to until now, the GDP of India has declined from about an annual rate of 8% to about 6%. So was that the doing of the demonetization policy?
Well, I think the first thing to note here is that as far as exports from India are concerned, both of goods as well as services, there has been a trend of somewhat stagnation throughout this current decade. So it's not that before demonetization exports were growing very rapidly. The second important, I think, thing that is to be kept in mind is that one cannot look at India's as an economy in which the unorganized and the organized sectors are two separate parts of the economy, but two parts which are interlinked in several different ways. As far as exports are concerned, I think the unorganized sector in India plays a very important role in reducing costs in even the organized sector. Both by virtue of the fact that in the production, there are production linkages where some parts of production activity does take place in the unorganized sector at a much lower cost than would be done in the organized. The unorganized sector also underlies the low-wage economy. It allows even the organized sector to operate with relatively lower wages than the organized sector, because the low-wage economy sustains on the basis of the existence of an unorganized sector. And these low wages in turn allow India's exchange rate to be much more competitive. So our national price ratio is very low, price level is very low. Therefore, our PPP and nominal exchange rates vary dramatically. So all of these, so even when sectors like IT, which have relatively much higher wage levels, their competitiveness also depends on the low-wage the general low-wage economy, which is sustained by the unorganized sector. Now, this sector exists because your economic structure has not evolved in a way which allows that sector to be also absorbed in the organized, and the organized simply is unable to generate sufficient employment for large segment of the economy. So I think the ability of India to be able to push up its export levels, which were already low, stagnating, and the possibilities that India might have had in taking advantage of the so-called trade wars that are taking place. A lot of people in India would argue that actually India might be able to benefit because some production might actually shift to India, given that there are these problems. But because of the fact, if you damage the unorganized sector, that doesn't necessarily actually help in pushing up exports. It's a kind of catch-22 situation that the Indian economy always faces. If you want to push up exports, your low-wage economy is an important source of competitiveness, probably the only source that you have of competitiveness. And at the same time, that particular sector existence means that you have problems as far as your domestic market is concerned. So this contradiction is always faced. I would think that the stagnation that Indian exports was already facing is something that has perhaps been aggravated by this damage rather than being resolved in any way by this measure.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm not going to summarize that, but what it sounds like is that the two are linked. the domestic policy and which has an impact on international trade of India. Dr. Kasi, as Dr. Siliaporn has said, technology is coming. We don't see any way to stop it. The feeling of inequality, insecurity will always be there. How can we prepare the people to adjust to the new changes? Change will come.
I think Dr. Sheila Paul, she mentioned one thing, and also Professor Majumdar mentioned, with a purpose. Technology everything has a purpose, and technology hasn't come from heaven. In fact, the human minds have only created this whole technology, tools and apparatus. And also, by and large, we know that technology has come from the West. The Western countries, the level of acceleration, the level of advancement they have, the level of culture they have. So they are many years ahead of countries like these South Asian countries or Southeast Asian countries to an extent. So society moves in gradation, because evolution of society or the mind or the capacities comes through stages of evolution, and technology moves very fast. It's a geometrical ratio, accelerates very fast. But the adoption level of the people, people not like you and me probably, but the whole mass of people, the adoption level will always be low. So the gap will always be there. The coming of technology, the invention of technology, every day there's something new happening in the technological field. But do you expect you and me to be, move faster and grab it and take it and all? How much we can do that? Otherwise, you'll keep struggling whole life, running after technology and, absorbing it. So we need that the divide is increasing. And at the same time, how we can build the capacities of the people in that case. How the people are to be prepared. And people means not people that they are only in one bracket. They are in multiple layers, of society, gender aspect, the economic aspect of people, the cultural aspect, the poverty aspect. There are so many divides within the people itself. Geographical aspects, some geographies are so far away, there is no connectivity, no roads, nothing. So how do you prepare them? So I think it's all about, one is that strengthening local institutions. Strengthening local institutions of services delivery, like local banks, local offices and all, and making them prepared to mobilize the community and absorb them and take the technology to the people, to the community in a way they're comfortable with, and they are adaptable, they can easily take it to use those technologies. So that is one thing. Second is, in terms of more capacity building programs we need at the community level. In terms of how are the local schools, colleges, our local offices, as I mentioned, and especially at the community level, how there is a mechanisms are created where the people's capacity, their awareness, their sensitization to technologies are being engaged with. I think that is another thing. Third thing is about and the second point is about, and the second point I mentioned is about also removing the fear and insecurity in the minds of the people, because a common man has to be, they are very insecure, or they are very hesitations to adopt technology very fast. So how to address those psychological aspect of adapting or adopting technology, that is has to be taken into consideration. And also, of course, we cannot stop technology. Technology has come in, and we have to take it for our purpose, for our usage and benefit. But the third point, and the third point is about how we decentralize the whole approach of technology push bottom up, because everything looks like coming from the top. But I think how the whole process is decentralized, the program is designed in such a way that it starts right from the bottom up, community level, that design is being created and then you implement it. Because that is very crucial, I believe. Any design of the program, technology-based program, has to be decentralized and democratized. That is very crucial. And I'm a great follower of a philosopher of technology, Andrew Finberg. So he's a great, he's a 20th, so he's a 21st century philosopher of technology, and I follow his thought process. So he talks about, by and large, how technology needs to be democratized and needs to be more people-friendly, community-friendly, and how the design process is very important, and where people have a participation right from the very beginning, so that they can take ownership to adopt the technology and contribute to the whole national efforts and government effort to make technology inclusive and empowering. I think that is very crucial.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kersey. I have one last question for Dr. Silapon before I open up the floor. Dr. Silapon, Dr. Kasi threw in a lot of big words in there. Bottom-up approach, participation, ownership, inclusiveness. What should be the role of government? You work a lot with government, with policy making. What should be the role of government in preparing the people to be ready for the digital age?
Two things. The success of the growth of e-commerce in Thailand has rest on, I think, two conditions. And those two conditions are two things that the government could do. One is the penetration of internet. Internet users in Thailand have risen in the past 10 years 4 times. Right now it's about 60 or 70% of the population have access to internet and use it as internet users. Another is the what I would call the literacy, the digital literacy. There are two things that, because especially people, as we are approaching the aging age. Right now we are not aging society, we are aged society already in Thailand. The age group are new poor, or potentially to become a new poor group. Lack of ability to use technologies, those ITs, because of the learning capability of them. For youngsters, it's easier, but again, the government could still do a lot of things regarding this. In fact, I'd like to mention this. I think some of the largest impact of digital technology on trade development would occur, at least from what I experienced, would occur in 2 spheres. One is the e-commerce platform, another is the digital currency. But cashless society is only the beginning towards the digital currency. And if you're not, if you don't think about it well-rounded or keen enough, you might end up having the repercussion that was not intended in the first place. Right now in Thailand, about cashless society, the Bank of Thailand has issued some policies and do something with the commercial bank regarding replacing money with other things like prompt pay. People here, at least half of people in this room would use prompt pay to receive their payment, or the QR code that when you go and buy things, sometimes you don't have to carry cash, you just do the bank transfer using the QR code of the people. On the social welfare card, is another form that we are using right now. That's what the government is doing as well. The blockchain for the LG, the letter of guarantee, using with a bank but digital currency has a long way to go in Thailand, and it's. I think at present Dr. Tuisak might know better on that, and he'll be next speaker in the next session. That would we might learn from him about this too. But as I said, the two spheres that would impact trade and development in the next decade, in my opinion, would be e-commerce platform and digital currency. And we are on the path to that. The thing is that we need to tread carefully and think seriously about the end point or the objective, the final objective that we want out of the use of those two digital tools in this new era.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Silaporn. Her answer is internet penetration, which is basically availability of technology for all, and also digital literacy, which is to increase the capacity building efforts of the government to ensure that people are ready to use technology. And even country like Sweden conceded that they still need banknotes, especially for the elderly and the minority groups in Sweden. So although they're heading towards a cashless society, but at the same time they feel that they not yet have the ability to go 100% in terms of being a cashless society. So with that, I would like to open up the floor. We have about 40 minutes more to hear comments from the floor and questions for the panelists. Please raise your hand if you would like to make some comments. Oh, okay, Dr. Kasi, very quickly.
Sorry, just one point I missed out. Because when you raise the point of how we can prepare the community or to be part of the digital mainstream, another important factor is, of course, we all know is the content part in the digital platforms. So what content is relevant for each one of us, the farmers or the women or the college youth, or any XYZ, because depending on the occupations or professions or work or interest. So that content is very important, relevant content. And second is the localization of content, in my own local language, because this is one thing we are struggling in India, because of course the diversity is so much in the country, and the whole digital thing is mostly being pushed through English, by and large globally also. So localization of content and the relevant content will also determine the level of mainstreaming.
Okay, very good. Any comments, questions from the floor, please? Please, yes, the lady in front. Can you get a microphone over here?
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation from all the three speakers, sharing different perspectives, which is really important. My name is Dr. Salma Abbasi, and I will be on this afternoon. What I wanted to say and caution, I like the focus of people-centric development, whether you're in the rural areas or you're from low literacy backgrounds. But what I would also like to point out is that there's a great opportunity to learn from lessons learned from countries like Sweden and the US and other countries that have been early adopters of technology. The psychological aspect that you're talking about are one of the things that we're struggling with in Europe, in the UK in particular, the issues of addiction. When we push at a technology, let's push technology for the sake of technology, we don't have the regulations in place. I have spent last week with you and ESCAP having fantastic discussions on broadband. but our regulations in this Asia-Pacific region, regulations and policies aren't up to speed to the challenges if you reflect and research in different economies where the internet has been now integrated into the life of people. The Sweden retraction of the cashless is a perfect example where the government going 100 miles per hour suddenly realizing the population isn't there. And the circle, as you said, Dr. Said, about the cycle, the rapid speed of technology versus the adoption of technology. It's not a circle, that's actually an ecliptic point. Some people will adopt and some will take a longer time. And with the aging population, as also mentioned, it's a global phenomena. There's a lot of innovation in this area because the further marginalization group is growing. So thank you.
No, thank you very much. That's a very good comment. We really need to learn from those who are already have implemented it and see what's suitable for us. Any other comments and questions? Please. Ambassador.
Gradually was former ambassador to India. Nice to see you all. Well, I have a question to Dr. Surajit about digital currency. Now we know that from trade war, US and China is becoming currency war. So how India think about this? Because no matter digital currency, whenever it become the world currency, but today, currency war is supposed to be the most important issue that we should address, because in 1997, you all know that the financial crisis in Southeast Asia, in Asia in particular, it's resulting from the currency manipulation. They're one of the most important subject. So maybe you can share with us how India look at the currency war that China and US is engaging from tariff to currency war. And for Dr. Syed, you end your presentation with the word seem to be a gross national happiness, or GNS, gross happiness versus GDP. So maybe you can share with us, because I was ambassador to India and I fully realized that the word that you present somehow present the philosophy, or if not so Buddhism as well. So, and for Dr. Silapon, I like your remarks about whether the word export-import is now obsolete. Okay? So I've been asking everyone in this room that we have all the means to collect tax from e-commerce, but why don't we? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador Grit. Dr. Masunda.
If I understood you correctly, thank you for your question. There are two parts. One to do with the approach that India has towards digital currencies and its use, and the second part related to the question of currency wars. As regards digital currency, I think at the moment Indian official view is very skeptical. So there are regulations outlawing the use of bitcoins and things like that. So it's banned in India at the moment, so it's illegal. So there the approach is very hostile to the digital currencies. With regard to the question of currency wars, as far as India is concerned, India has never really needed to actually intervene to manipulate its exchange rate, because it is already, because of the low wage kind of context, it kind of remains competitive. And India's national price level has not been going up, unlike in the case of the rest of East and Southeast Asia. It's not been going up. So it has never really had to, in that sense, manipulate, but India remains extremely vulnerable on the currency front because it's an economy which perpetually has a current account deficit. And because it's not a major location of exports or location of production for the world market, the capital flows that it gets are also not of the long-term variety, but significant part of the capital flows are short-term, relatively volatile capital flows. It is in a sense remarkable that India's economy has not experienced a currency crisis like East Asia did, given the fact that it has had such a persistent current account deficit and an exchange rate which is market determined, and the ability of the India's central bank to protect that currency given its dependence of the reserves itself on capital flows, volatile capital flows. It's therefore a remarkable story that it has not happened. But it remains an economy which is significantly vulnerable to a currency crisis.
Okay, that's interesting. Dr. Kasi, Dr. Silapong would like to say something, but maybe we should hear from the floor, huh? Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other comments, questions on the floor? Please. Please let us know what you think. Please. Over there, please. The gentleman towards that end. And we have another one over there.
Thank you so much to the moderator and to the speakers for your comments on a wonderful panel. I'm also speaking on the next panel with my friend Salma. And Doctor, forgive me if I mispronounce it, Zaki, I so appreciated your comments on mental health and gross national happiness. I'm talking about that later tonight. I'd love to hear you speak more about that. I'm still learning about trade, but I've studied gross national happiness. In the States, there's something called the Genuine Progress Indicator. The OECD has their Better Life Index. These metrics or these indicators, where do you think these are being helpful with regards to trade? I know with gross national happiness, that term sometimes confuses people because they think it's about mood or being happy just for the sake of being happy versus having factors beyond finances that can focus on the environment, etc. So I'd love to hear from you where these metrics or indicators beginning to open people's minds, if that makes sense, and where is this logic and also the actual metrics and indicators themselves, including the SDGs, where are these tools that are helping policymakers, and how are they helping policymakers? So where that is being useful, that can be replicated, if that made sense. And thanks, because I'm a little sleep deprived. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, the panelists would like to take one more question so that they can answer all of them together. Yes, please.
My name is Prida Tiasuwan. I'm a businessman from Thailand. I'm going to sidetrack a little bit before going to my question. A lot of people were mentioning about the gross national happiness. I happened to spend last 2 weeks with Gamma Ula, the director of the gross national happiness in Bhutan. And he just left me this morning for the airport, and he's still at the Suvarnabhumi airport if anyone want to talk to him. My question is, it is quite irony that the panelists up there represented the first and the second worst income distribution in the world. In other words, we are the two worst inequality country of the earth. Number one is Thailand, and number two is India. We used to be actually after India, but somehow we jumped over you. I don't know why. I never understand it actually. We all know that the reason for that inequality or poor distribution of income is the fact that there was just too few people on the top is producing the GDP for the country. In the case of Thailand, we have 300 companies that represented, to be exact, 50.5% of GDP. And of course, we have on our registration 300,000, 400,000 companies. So that represented about 1% or less than 1% of the company that is generating more than 50% of our GDP. Put a figure into more realistic scenario. In that 300 companies, probably employ about 3 million working population, and we have 43 million population. Therefore, the 3 millions produce more than 50%, and the 40 million produce another 49%. So that's the reason, obviously, for the inequality, and I think the same rule applies to India. Of course, the three distinguished doctors were very much pin their hope on the digital transformation. But Dr. Silapon made one very good point. We probably have bureaucracy that may have their goal or their target misleading. She didn't quite say that because she worked with them a lot, but I have the pleasure of not working with them directly, so I'm going to spell it out. If the Inland Revenue is looking to kill the startup e-commerce people, looking to collect tax, you will kill the chicken that will give the golden eggs. And you ought not to do that. That should not be your target. Let them come out. Let them prosper. Let them grow. Let them create the GDP proportion out from that 300 companies. And then you tax them heavily later. That should be the way to go. Thank you.
Oh. Thank you very much for a very insightful comments. Actually, this is the first session, so we try to be controversial and provocative at the same time. Later on in the afternoon, we'll have Dr. Heavens to speak to us on AI and singularity, which is something we look forward to hearing more about. So any other questions, comments on the floor, please? Anyone? So we still do not have any more questions, so I'll just turn back to our panelists to provide some feedbacks on the comments that were made.
Well, what I said was misunderstood to mean that I think digital technologies are the solution to India's development problems, then I must apologize, because that is certainly not my intention. I certainly hold the view that the fundamental problems are structural, and they will not be, and I am a critique of the view that technology or digital technologies can be a way of circumventing these problems. And the issue of inequality that you mentioned was certainly an extremely important thing. Let me kind of give you some additional figures with relation to India. India has a working age population of 800 million. The number of people who are considered in the workforce or who are supposed to be employed is under 500 million. So there's a very large proportion which is not even part of the labor force. Of this, about 480 million who are working, 51% are self-employed. About over 30% are casual labor, and only about 18% are in regular workforce. So the proportion of the Indian population which is in kind of regular employment with any enterprise which hires their labor services is a very, very small proportion of the entire population. And you get a structural situation in the Indian economy where with such a large labor surplus that there is a constant pressure, very strong pressure to keep the wages depressed. So even when people get employed in activities which are highly productive, the levels of wages that they receive are not only low, but they kind of remain stable. And what you're getting is a problem where a very large population which was dependent on agriculture is no longer able to sustain on the basis of agriculture. It is being pushed out of agriculture to look for non-agricultural work, which is simply not available. And therefore, the labor surplus situation is in a sense being reinforced rather than resolved by this. And the structural problem there is, therefore, how do you address this question of the inequalities that it means that any growth that you get simply bypasses large segments of the population. So if you look at the distribution of income in India, 10%, the top 10% of the population and the remaining 90% of the population, the average income levels are vastly different. So as soon as you move out of the top 10 to the next segment, it drops drastically. And that's kind of structurally inbuilt into the Indian economy at the moment. And I don't think that the resolution, I certainly don't hold the view that technology can be a resolver of that. Technology may assist if you are able to take other measures to address this structural imbalance in asset ownership, in the income distributions that arise from that particular structure of the economy.
Thank you, Dr. Kasi.
I think now, since I think many times we mention about happiness now, I think we all want to be happy. And the question is how we can be happy. Are we really happy? The question is, and what is the level of happiness? Benchmark, is there any benchmark? I think these are all questions that will come to the mind. Even to us, even to me also, even if I'm earning, my pay scale is going up every year. But sometimes I feel my needs are not fulfilled, probably. Sometimes I feel because I have to do this. So where is happiness then? What is my pursuit of happiness? What is the level of happiness then? And where can I find happiness in that case? So I think the answer lies probably within, in that case, which can be applied to a larger societal context or national context, is happiness is a subjective phenomena, subjective concept. It's very subjective by and large. So when we say inequality in a society, that doesn't mean that inequality is going to be at that level. As of today, there is some level of equality, will not be there for every time down the line. It will either go down or go up. That level of inequality will change because change is constantly happening. So assuming that our inequality level will go down because efforts are going on, economic inclusion, investment, financial inclusion, production, distribution and all, social security and all those things. But if the inequality level is diminishing and is a move towards equality is happening, maybe some gradual process. But what about in a situation where a major segment of population has moved up, the middle class, the upper middle class and all those things are moving up, and technology also have created a new digital middle class, digital community. But what happens to this, our mind? So how do we judge this process of moving up and down? How we are comparing the status level? Because every now and then we are comparing. Even I compare myself all the time, vis-a-vis him or her or something. Where I am in the ladder. That is, where I fit into the society. How I need to behave, my dress code, my behavior, my posture, and everything has been pushed in the minds all the time. And also digital technology is giving exposed to this whole, things around, and I'm seeing every time technology making me sing. So all this, the mind is constantly in the fight within. So that inequality, I think, as of now, I do not have answer that what is that level of satisfaction will come, happiness will come when it comes to the question of mind. Our mind is happy or not at individual level, I am saying. But I think at the national level, probably, again, I'm saying I don't have a direct answer to those. But I think at a national level, to talk about the new narrative of development, new narrative of growth, where the happiness is taken into consideration, which is again a subjective phenomena, is about, I think, few things could be looked into very seriously in terms of the social security mechanism, that people are secured as a whole. What is a mechanism, social security mechanism, so that people can fall back upon when they're in crisis. That security aspect is very important. Secondly, is important in terms of in India, for example, we have this this purchasing power capacity parity index, some income level index we have. No, what is that we say, Professor Saab? That जो हमको yearly income होना चाहिए. What is it? Universal basic income. That level we keep on every now and then. After many years, the government is to keep on increasing that level. A basic minimum income level one has to be. So that has to be taken care of. How? Because because as that measurement of index of basic minimum level of income for the last mile to determine the purchasing power, that has to be determined by the government. At what level it is being determined based on the need and the basic need and measurement, and all those indicators has to be taken into considerations. And thirdly, I think and also which is much at a philosophical level. Of course, when you talk about gross happiness, certain indicators have to be there, and these indicators 5, 10, 15, whatever, has to be context based, the country based, the situation. It cannot be universal. It has to be contextual, based on that country's needs and capacity and resources and the abilities and all. So in that level, I think it's also on the philosophical level, I would rather feel that how our institutions are being designed or responsive to the needs of the people. Second is that in terms of our whole cultural being, in terms of our behavior, our educational system, our learning mechanisms, so how they are being also tuned to those happiness parameter in terms of, because there is of course constant competitions, we have to compete, we have to do this. So I think these are all a lot of thoughts that is coming to my mind. As I said, I do not have any answer probably, but as a country as a whole, how much of competition, how much of trade war, how much of, because this is one world only. You have to die, I have to die. People, all human civilization have to die. So in the name of competition, pursuit of this, I don't know how much of happiness we have lost in the whole process. Because as a country, that narrative, I don't know, narrative at community level, at family level, at individual level, at college level, and I know at global level is happening, some discussion narrative. Probably that narrative needs to be more discussion to reach to the level of happiness, so that we are all happy family in one world rather than fighting and competing each other. And with that, we bring a lot of vices into the society, problems we have in society, the stress level we have, the egos we have. We have a lot of egos now. There's a new phenomena. Of course, we may not talk about openly, but we are all having certain, that whole virus has come in. And also the whole having everything also, we are insecure. So all those things, how do we address in that happiness context is very, very important. Just to be good human being and be happy, be helpful to each other, I think. Those are philosophical lines I'm throwing here now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kasi. Dr. Silaporn, would you like to have some comments?
2 points. The first one, I'd like to address the GNH issues. I used to give research grants to teams that revisiting those concepts as well. In fact, in Thailand, there has been movement of some local communities on this, and they have visited Bhutan and all those places. On the GNH, I used to listen to Joseph Stiglitz, a Nobel Prize winner, economist, who actually gave a lecture once in Thailand on this. Not exactly the issue of GNH, but he came to talk about the sufficiency economy and the movement in Thailand. One of the things that I learned from him was that he mentioned that about back in 1800, that was over 200 years ago, when we first have the Industrial Revolution, what it actually did to people was that it reduced the time that people have to labor to get food, to get all the surviving things that they need, all those, the necessity, the food, the shelter, the clothing, and the medicines. Back in 1800, he said that before the invention of the loom used in the industry, people spent almost all day, to find food and make clothing and do, all those things. But after the invention of the loom, then it reduced like 8 hours or 10 hours per day to only 2 hours. And nowadays, he mentioned that we only use perhaps only 1 hour a day to fulfill our survival needs, to eat, to have clothing and all those things. That brings us to the question of overconsumption. We produce the GDP, the GNP, the last P is the production, right? Gross national production. We produce for consumption for the past 200 years. And nowadays we still do. And the paradigm and the concept and the tools that we use right now belongs to that whole realm of thinking about national production. And underlying the production is the production for consumption. Whereas today we are over-consuming. How many of you have less than 2 watches? I presume that you have more than 5, each of us, right? You only have 1? Really? In India? In Thailand, nobody has less than 5 watches, I think. You have more than, especially ladies, you have more than 10 pairs of shoes or 10 bags, We have already overconsumed. And that's the name of the game. And we have to, use all this advertisement, all those things, to promote consumption, to run the economy, to make the economy growing. Because we think that the name of the game is production for consumption. If you're driving towards a new paradigm of G&H, you might have to think about production for something else. One of the research that I have supported has aimed into this line. The theme was production for sharing. For example, you might count and start counting only business that has value to share. But sharing for people, especially food industry, for example. It has huge potential to share, especially cross-country, international trade, for countries like Ethiopia or countries in Africa where food is scarce. And we have plenty of food, and all those economy rested upon those type of economic activities or food industry in this case, should have a larger count better represented in the G&H than other sectors like luxury goods, for example. So when we are approaching a new paradigm, we need a new concept and new tools as well. Much like what I talked about the e-commerce, the digital platform in today's economy, we need a new tools, new concept. Taxation, import, export were terms that were used in the old economy. But with the new economy approaching under this digital era, I think those things need to be revisited as well. Also, even the role of the government, because I think in the fact, not only I think, the fact is that government service in most countries of the world were less and less efficient in delivering service and solving inequality in the countries. If it were efficient, Thailand wouldn't have been sought up to number one in inequality, meaning that even though you tax people a lot and give it to the government is not today the effective mechanism to deliver the lessening of inequality anymore. You might need to find other mechanisms, and those mechanisms, I think, are in the small business sectors. As the gentleman over there said, it's the chicken that gives the golden eggs. In fact, you should invite him to speak. He speaks better than me. Another point on the inequality. Do we have time? Are we running out of time?
A few more minutes, please.
Okay. Another point is about the inequality in Thailand. As I have to be in the committee, in the commission on social equality that draft the 20-year strategy of Thailand, solving this long time inequality history in Thailand is not easy. One of the strategy, not only about what we talk today, is that we need to deconcentrate the growth poles in Thailand. And it has been put into the 20-year strategy, national strategy, that 20 years from now we should have at least 15 growth poles in Thailand. And the name of the city has already been marked. All distributed in the all 5 regions of Thailand. And digital infrastructure is one of the things that is marked as what is needed and the thing that the government should invest in to provide equal opportunity of people to access. But not only the digital infrastructure, I think digital activities is another thing that needs to be promoted. And it could be promoted through the how we deal with the digital platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Siraporn. What the panelists, the 3 panelists for this first session, they are doing, I hope you noticed this, but what they are doing is they're, in a very subtle manner, they are passing on the topics on to the afternoon session. So there's a lot of things that they raise here. Universal basic income has just came up. The idea of shared economy. And one thing that they have not mentioned, but it is pretty much evolving at the global level at this point, is the digital ID. So these are the things that are coming into play. And at this first session, what we're saying is that please, in the afternoon session, please touch on these topics. We have about 7 minutes left for more comments and questions on the floor. Any other one in the audience would like to have to make more comments? If not, then I'll ask, this is really 2 minutes. I will ask each of the panelists to give a 2-minute conclusion for this session.
Well, let me kind of respond to what Dr. Abbasi raised in my closing remarks, which is that I think you have to look at, say, a country like India or an economy like India as one which in per capita income terms is perhaps 100 years behind the United States or Sweden, but in terms of the use of technology or the products is not that far behind. And what does that particular kind of combination result in? That is a unique combination where you cannot always necessarily learn from the experience of others, because you have to find your own ways of dealing with this specific kind of combination. Added to that is, of course, the question of the specific structural features associated with that per capita income level, which may be quite different from the kind of economic structures that are prevalent in economies like the US. So I think that combination is something that is going to be an important thing to. So we have to think indigenously in terms of understanding what is the implication of that combination. In addition, I think as a kind of response to what was being said about the shared economy and private business, I think there's one question that was to be dealt with, is that if private businesses thrive on expansion, then naturally that itself will produce a drive for expanding consumption. So if you are going to have an economic structure in which private businesses drive the economy, then that is naturally an outcome, unless you can think of a scenario where certain businesses are expanding and others are contracting at the same time. Or one has to think in terms of consumption patterns which are different, very different in nature from what we have at the moment. So how does one resolve this particular contradiction is also, I think, a challenge relating to what was raised earlier. So.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kasi. Relevant and localized content.
Something on content?
No, your concluding remarks, please.
Again, I think just to summarize, and sorry to be repetitive, maybe a few points. Technology has come in; it is going to stay. Number one. Second is we need to look at the readiness, e-readiness, our technology readiness of the community, how to adapt, feel friendly, feel relevant, and doesn't feel threatened, and that is important. Third is that in a country where already there is a vast socio-economic divide because of XYZ reasons, historical reasons, the coming in technology can aggravate or can increase that divide because the government will push in more services, content, transactions, everything online, technology-based. But if the vast majority or who are not part of that mainstream effort, I think their condition may aggravate, and the divide may increase in that case. And in that case, the inequality can increase and will increase, with a lot of social tensions, conflicts, frictions may happen. And number 4 is about the whole psychology of inequality. Which has two contexts. One is a real context, which is obvious. Psychology of inequality is real to an extent, of course, because of ground situations and structural problems and opportunity problems and all. But in the other sense, it could also be fictional, may not be real to another extent. Because the level of happiness, we don't know where is that, what is the level of happiness, and satisfaction level. So in that case, that psychology of inequality will again keep continuing even if we have risen up to the ladder of society. So that is another challenge for us as a human being. And fifthly, and the last point is in terms of the government's policy program effort that ma'am is also doing, inclusion approach and all, probably has to be more in the context of local needs, the capacity of the country to safeguard the community, social protection measures, then social security mechanisms, and making services more inclusive and easily accessible, and increasing the trust of the people on the government and the governance system is more important also to be part of the happiness index, because in larger developing countries, third world countries, the trust of the people in the government, the systems and processes is very poor. And also it looks like sometimes the offices, departments, and the institutions are threatening and non-responsive. So that has to be, I think, minimized and could be erased, because it should not be intimidating. The structures and the governance process mechanism should not be intimidating. That is linked to the larger happiness of the whole population, citizens, I think, by and large. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kasi. Dr. Silapon, you have the last word.
My last word is that from my many years of experience, I think whatever solution we think about, solution that works right now is solution that is context specific. Meaning that even if you learn from countries where some solution might work, some digital technology might work in certain sphere, you need to analyze your own context that you want to implement that on. And that starts with the purpose. Each country has different problems, different burning issues that need to be addressed. In Thailand, inequality is the burning issues. In other countries, it might be growth. In some countries, it might be welfare, whatever. But if you start with analyzing your context first, thinking about the objective, the goals that you want to achieve. Digital technology is part of the tools that could help you go to that direction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And please join me in thanking our distinguished panelists, Dr. Masumda, Dr. Kasi, and Dr. Silapon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Dr. Dam as well. ขอเสียงปรบมือให้กับ Dr. Dam ด้วยนะคะ Thank you very much to our moderator, especially to our speakers, Dr. Surajit, Dr. Seet, and Dr. Silapon, for sharing with us such a truly profound knowledge. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for a palatable lunch. We had prepared you the best selected menus for you to dine together at Ballroom 3 and Vaulty Room. So please make sure that you make your way to the exit way, and you will receive individual coupon that looks like this, written in a particular dining room for each of you. The blue one will indicate that you will have lunch at Ballroom 3. And the white coupon will indicate that you will have lunch at Vaulty. Once again, the blue one at Ballroom 3 and the white one, lunch at Vaulty. And we will be back here at 1 p.m. to continue with another interesting session. Session 2, the artificial intelligence, AI, and the challenges of tomorrow, that we will be shared together on how AI will affect it more in humans' lives. So please, ladies and gentlemen, please have a wonderful lunch and enjoy the rest of the day. Bon appetit. สวัสดีค่ะ